Hello, everyone, and good evening from Finland, or good morning or good night, depending on where you're joining us from. Welcome to the HundrED Global Roundtable on Gamified Curricula. We have an extremely interesting session prepared for you today where we are going to discuss gamified curricula, what it is, and how gamified elements can be used to improve students' learning experiences. My name is Jamie, and I'm the project coordinator at HundrED. I'll be hosting the session today, and our executive director, Lasse Leponiemi, will moderate the panel discussion. So to start off, please introduce yourselves in the chat and let us know where you are joining from. And tell us a little bit more about you. Are you a teacher, a parent, an innovator, policymaker? Anything you do, we want to know. And if you have any questions, we also want to hear them. You can use the Q&A box or the chat function at any time. Just to let you know, this session is also being recorded and we will share it after, so no worries if you've missed something or you want to rewatch it later. Now I'm going to give you a brief overview of what you can expect in today's session. So first, we'll have our executive director, Lasse Leponiemi, introduce our spotlight on gamified curricula and give us a brief introduction on the concept. Then we will have a special presentation from HundrED Youth Ambassador Namya Joshi on what she thinks makes a great game-based learning experience and what she would love to see improved in schools to make learning more engaging and fun. Following that, we will have a panel of 3 amazing experts on gamification and education. Dr. Brooke Morrill, Rob Alvarez, and Ash Brandin, and Lasse will facilitate the panel discussion. After the panel discussion, we will have time to answer some questions, so please drop them in the question and answer box. We will also put your questions together to make an FAQ page on the HundrED Spotlight website, so check out that in the future. And finally, Lasse and Deborah, Mensah-Bonsu from Supercell will talk more about our partnership and why Supercell is interested in gamified curricula. And that's all. So first, I'll pass it off to Lasse.
Thank you so much, Jamie. And what a great pleasure to be here. I'm seeing that we have over 100 participants or attendees already joining us for this session. Like Jamie was saying, my name is Lasse Leponiemi. I'm the executive director and co-founder of HundrED. And HundrED, we are a Finnish mission-driven organization doing mainly 2 things. We identify education innovations around the world. We have a huge database with over 4,400 solutions. And then we support the implementation of these identified and validated education innovations around the world. Today, we have over 110 countries represented in our community, so we can say that we are a truly global community of people who are excited about the future of education and how it can shape the life of our young people. And when we do this identification and implementation work, then what we want to do with all of these education innovations is that we want to amplify the great impact stories, the success stories, how these innovations have been scaling around the world. And where we are especially interested is how these great innovations can shape and transform systems to be something more, to be somehow more engaging, to support better learning for the students in different kind of contexts. I often say that education is very much contextual. We have different countries, we have different challenges in different education systems. And that's something that we should be taking always into account when we want to improve the education in different ways. But when we are thinking about our students, our young people, no matter where we travel, no matter where we go, we can always find kids playing. We can always find them creating games by themselves, or they're using some games that they know from the older students or from their parents. And I think like this kind of like a playfulness and playful approach for learning is also very much vital. And it can motivate the students to do even more. And I'm very happy to give you a little brief overview of the HundrED Spotlight on Gamified Curricula. First of all, I want to let you know that HundrED Spotlights are thematic or regional collections of education innovations we have identified for different purposes. And in this current spotlight on gamified curricula, we are collaborating together with Supercell to identify different kind of solutions that could be helping us to spot education innovations that can make learning fun and which can bring the benefits of play-based learning to the system level. We often hear about different kind of learning solutions and interventions, which might be applications or this kind of like a single solutions that teachers can be applying for the learning situations. And there is a ton of great documentation about those, and we all know that they will be benefiting the learning in different ways. But something that we are actually more interested in this gamified curricula spotlight is to find out, are there different kind of ways how we can gamify the whole school ecosystem? How can we make the school to be playful from throughout the ways it operates? Are the teachers allowed to play in the classrooms or in the teacher's room? Or how are we engaging parents to be part of this playfulness and different ways how we can empower them to be part of the school community? And when we are looking at the gaming ecosystems, we see that they are providing sense of belonging by building community, and they can be facilitating friendships and encouraging teamwork. And I think that in the school context, these are very helpful and important things as well. And when the community comes together and they have a common something that they can be doing together in a very meaningful and fun way, it also fosters empathy by helping us tell our stories and experiences of others. And these gamification mechanics can also cultivate self-esteem by rewarding perseverance or problem solving or creativity and self-expression. And all of these are things that we often discuss when we are talking about 21st century skills. And when we are looking at the world of education ecosystems, when we are seeing how the different curriculums are evolving around the world, we are seeing at the moment that many education ministries are implementing these kind of like multidisciplinary subjects to their context. And what we are hoping here is that in today's discussion we can be kind of like seeing and discussing about different kind of solutions, how things can be done. And next we have our youth ambassador, and Jamie, can you please take the stage?
For sure. Thank you, Lasse, for that introduction. Now I'd like to introduce a special guest, Namya Joshi. Namya is one of our 100 Youth Ambassadors and is a 16-year-old student from Punjab, India. But don't let her age fool you. She's an official Minecraft student ambassador by Microsoft and has trained more than 15,000 teachers around the world on the use of Microsoft tools like Minecraft, Scratch, and Flipgrid on how to use technology to make learning and teaching fun. We're really excited to have her here today to share with us what she thinks are essential elements teachers should consider when gamifying the curricula. Welcome, Namya.
Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. I'm very grateful for HundrED to give me this opportunity to present here today on engaging game-based learning to learners and how that can be introduced in the classroom. So next slide, please. And as Jamie said, I'm Namya Joshi, and I love to empower student voice through Minecraft, through TED Talks, being a Teach Education ambassador, my book, podcasts, YouTube, my motto, Each One Teach 10, entrepreneurship and STEM. Next slide, please. So when it comes to, playing, I've always believed this thing that play is our brain's favorite way of learning because we play games for fun. And the fun is always having certain elements and objectives. And when those objectives can be introduced in the classroom, that becomes gamification in education. Next slide, please. So why and how Minecraft? That is because it helps in engaging students in the classroom, and it helps in using game-based learning, so having more connections between the students, and that helps in collaboration. Next slide, please. When it comes to teachers, it gives them an opportunity to make better lessons, provides them with training, helps them to empower students by giving them the voice, choice, agency, and they understand how they can make students collaborate with each other. Next slide, please. So when it comes to interdisciplinary learning through Minecraft, here are some of the lessons that I have created in English, maths, history, science, art, and computer science. So for example, in history, we have Epic Ramayana. In literature, we have Harry Potter. In computer science, we have cybersecurity. And like this, I have been able to create 100+ lessons inside Minecraft, mapped to SDG goals and mapped to what we study inside the classroom. And to give you a deeper insight, can we move on to this next slide, please? Where I'm going to talk about a case study at my own school, Satpal Mittal. Next slide, please. So here's a breakup of an example, of an experiment done by my principal at my school. So we took students 30 each from grade 3 and 4. And first, they were given like a normal sheet to solve the question papers. Next slide, please. And they were given like the ones who were not able to, pass that, then they were given the question through Minecraft. And the response was amazing because, again, that's a visual way of expressing yourself. And next slide, we were able to see the analysis of the data that students were able to perform better when it came to Minecraft than traditional learning that is just text-based. So here it is the proof that how Minecraft and how visual learning is helping students to perform better and become better collaborators, better engagers, and better individuals at the larger end. Next slide, please. For talking about game-based learning in my school, next slide, please. We've been able to see different fests and clubs being organized. Like every year, our school organizes Satpan Innovation Fest, where we're using gamification with Minecraft and giving out challenges to the SDG goals, where they have to solve the SDG by giving out the solution through Minecraft. Like when it comes to clean water sanitation, they have to talk about how that can be solved, and the prototype of that is made using Minecraft. And also, we have clubs being organized in our school where students are the leaders of the clubs. And like I've been one of the leaders of teaching Minecraft to students and what is the importance of game-based learning as well. Next slide, please. Now, you've heard me like talking about Minecraft, but again, it's not just Minecraft. We have so many other tools, like for game-based learning through collaboration, there's Flip, there's Wakelet. Through reflection, we have Sway, Sudoku. Assessment can be done through Kahoot, through OneNote. When it comes to problem solving, we always have Minecraft and Kodu. So the skills are always like collaboration, creativity, critical thinking, communication, global citizenship, and of course, the ICT tools, which are the 21st century skills. Next slide. Because we are being taught the skills that are going to last lifetime. So why not use them in a good way? I hope you enjoyed listening to me today. Thank you so much. Have a nice day.
Thank you so much, Namya, for your insightful presentation. So now it is time for the panel discussion. Today we are joined by 4 experts on using gamification in learning. I will introduce each of the panelists, and then Lasse will take over to moderate the panel discussion. So first we have Brandin, who is a teacher who is innovating in their own practice by finding clever ways to use student interests, such as video games, to make learning more fun and effective. Their Instagram page, The Gamer Educator, has helped tens of thousands of families make screen time beneficial, and they presented in various conferences discussing how to create game-like classrooms. Welcome, Ash. Next, let's welcome Dr. Brooke Morrill, who is the Senior Director of Education at Schell Games. Brooke's expertise lies in the fields of behavioral science and psychology, which she uses at Schell Games to increase the impact of and engagement in the company's educational and transformational games. Welcome, Brooke. And finally, we have Rob Alvarez, who is an expert and advocate of gamification and game-based solutions in education and learning. He runs the podcast Professor Game, where he interviews world-class experts and practitioners of gamification to get ideas, insights, and inspiration to make learning experiences more meaningful. He's also a consultant, professor, and workshop facilitator for gamification and game-based solutions at IE Business School, as well as other top education institutions. So now we are ready to move to the panel discussion, and Lasse will be asking more specific questions for our panelists to moderate the discussion. And also feel free to drop any questions you have in the chat, which we'll be answering later on. Over to you, Lasse.
Thank you, Jamie. And I guess the team knew what kind of risk they are taking when they are letting me to do the introduction for the panel discussion. And so I was almost carried away because I'm very excited about this topic. And thank you so much, Namya, for the great presentation. And it has been also greatly appreciated in the chat. It's amazing that that as a student, you have been able to train and work with such a big number of teachers and students and show the power of these kind of different solutions. And there were also some great examples of different solutions that can be used in the learning environment to make them more gamified or playful. And as I would actually like to start with you, and we could kick off by thinking like, why has gamification caught on as a trend in a curricula development? Why do you think that has happened?
I actually don't know if I'm the best person to ask, because as someone in the education field who's really on the ground where these things would be implemented, I don't think it's caught on at all. Where I am and where I work, I am often the only person who is thinking about these things or doing these things in the way that I am. I think it's something that we often look to as we are becoming more and more technologically driven, particularly in the last few years. We really are beginning to see a shift in the way that we look at technology and digital tools and really see them as tools instead of this sort of antithesis to education. And I think it does take a long time and a fair amount of time to see that go from an idea and from the like private sector side and the design side to actually being implemented regularly in classrooms and by teachers, because it's a lot of work to do it that way.
Yeah, that's very kind of like easy to understand that, you know, like there is always, like when you are working with these new solutions, you have to find ways how you can kind of like embed them as a part of the existing system. And often also when we are working with our innovators, they might be saying that, hey, I'm actually feeling a little bit alone here, that am I the only crazy one who wants to kind of like try out these new things? And when they then find people that can be supportive in that, then that changes a lot of kind of like the dynamics. And maybe we can then continue with Rob and have you been kind of like, how have you been kind of like approaching this, and how have you been seeing a successful implementation or different kind of like successes in gamified curricula when you have been working with different schools and within the different systems?
I would have to, you know, in a great measure, I would agree mostly with Ash, because I mean, but there's another side to it as well. So in general, you know, you pick a random classroom, right? You know, use statistics, right? You pick a random classroom, go into the classroom, see if there's any gamification in that classroom. You'll probably not get any gamification, and you'll say, well, you know, it's a full school. Let's look around the school and see which one has gamification. And, you know, chances are you'll find maybe one or two, and that's it, right? So there's one or two teachers using it. However, the flip side of this is, and I love to have seen several of people who are doing great work of this in the audience as well. When people do start, I agree that it does take a significant amount of work, but teaching takes a significant amount of work. It's a profession that is, you know, thankful in many ways and not so thankful in others. So there's a lot of work involved. And this requires extra work as well. So implementing it takes work. Once you put in that work, right? Even if you put it, maybe for a lesson, which is what some people say, it looks overwhelming a whole year. In my case, I'm a university professor saying, a full subject, 15 sessions where you have all these things that, what, forget about your 15, 25, 50 sessions, your full year. Forget about that. Find something that you think is, either one of the worst performing lessons for you, from your perspective. Forget about the numbers. And try something new. What's the worst thing can happen? It performs a little bit worse or a little bit better. It's not a bad thing, right? So try something there. And I haven't seen, anybody sort of turn back from saying, I made the effort, I put this in for two things, probably, because it works, definitely, but also because you put in the effort and you see, the value of putting that in, and you say, well, if I put in this effort and I get these results, how about I put a little bit more effort maybe next year or during the year because you got excited about it and started implementing it a bit more. And there's, don't get me wrong, there's people doing full all year long, games, board games and stuff in the classroom, amazing stuff going on. But, when you see that as an educator who's either new or you've been teaching for 30 years, you say, well, how do I manage to do all that work? I'm talking people who do cards and do items and do, a huge board and a bunch of things. So it can be sometimes overwhelming. And the thing is, you don't have to do all of that. Maybe if that's it, you start small. And that's where I've seen, there's a huge success to people saying, you know what, I'm actually even going to grab somebody else's work. I'm going to put it in my classroom, see how it works. And I think that's one of the keys to actually catching in that sense.
I think there is a lot of wisdom what you are saying, and exactly kind of like, that like we have to start small. We are not able to transform everything at once. We have to be first trying out new things. We have to experiment them and see like how do they affect the learning in our own context and in our environment. And maybe this is something we could actually take forward with Brooke. So what kind of like a mechanics you think that work well at the curricular level or in a classroom? Can you be kind of like pointing out some examples from this field?
So if we're thinking about gamification as the application of game-based mechanics to a non-game context, it's classically talked about as points, badges, leaderboards, things that are relatively, and I say relatively with a huge grain of salt because it's not non-trivial, but relatively easy to track and allow students to see progress, allow teachers to see progress, allow students to earn things based on their own behavior and their own learning in order to motivate them to get to the next level. So I think that those are probably things that are most commonly thought of. But if we take a step back and think about not only gamification, but game-based learning, I think the mechanics wholly and solely depend on what content you're teaching. So when we approach creating a game for a transformational purpose, we make sure that we use mechanics that, so for those who might not be familiar, a game mechanic is what the player is doing to interact with the game and to move throughout a game, right? So we make sure that our game mechanics are supporting whatever evidence-based practice in real life actually affects a change in the behavior. So we, again, want to make sure that players interacting with a game are constantly and repeatedly having access and practice with what they're supposed to be learning. So it's hard to narrow in on a specific mechanic because it's not the game in and of itself that is teaching. It's the content that's teaching. The game is there to help support that and to motivate players to be involved with things that they may or may not have already been interested in.
Yeah, thank you for bringing in those points. And then kind of like there is also kind of a like heated discussion going on in the chat where Rob is saying that there is also plenty of zero tech gamification, and I think that is also, a kind of like a common misassumption that the gamification would always be a mobile application or something like that. There is like we see kids playing in the schoolyard every day, and there is no technical interventions or solutions needed for that at all. But then if we go back to kind of like those mechanics and kind of like how do we find the right things for our context, I could maybe kind of like direct this back to us now. And as you were kind of like mentioning that sometimes you are feeling a little bit alone there, and when you are kind of like bringing in these gamified or playful solutions, how have you made the decisions, like what do you want to try, what do you want to experiment in your context?
Sorry, I lost my mute button for a minute there. I had the privilege of beginning my journey of gamifying in my classroom, in that I began as a music teacher, and that gave me a lot of freedom and autonomy, and that I didn't have as much oversight regarding, meeting certain metrics or teaching to certain standards. I'm in the United States, and depending on where you are, there's a lot of oversight and micromanaging of expectations on teachers. So there are probably going to be many teachers who see this who would think I would never have the freedom to do this. But as Rob alluded to, sometimes it's just finding like, what's the one in I can do? What's the one thing I think I can do? And so for me, it was just thinking, what is something I feel like I like from game structure? And then how do I start bringing that in? And to bring up what was just coming up in the chat, because I said this as well as Rob, I was teaching music. We were not using technology at all. I wanted kids on instruments as much as possible. And I didn't want technology to be taking the place of that. I wanted the things that I like most about video games, that my students like most about video games, to be helping them in our music classroom. And whether kids are aware of it or not, often the things that we like most about gaming are actually psychological structures. And when we think about that, the psychological structures that are at play, a lot of those align with best pedagogical practice and best educational practice. And I think being able to present it in that way can often, I think, de-escalate some teachers who might hear gamification and think technology all the time. And instead thinking of, no, it's another way of aligning with best practice. And so for me, it was just figuring out, how do I make learning better? How do I make it more engaging? And it literally for me started over brunch at a Mexican restaurant when I started writing ideas down. It just went from there.
All right, so the next time any one of you is having a brunch anywhere in the world, something fantastic might come out of that breakfast moment. And I think that's the key, we have to be allowing some space and time around us if we want to be creative and if we want to find new solutions for something what we do. We often say that, especially when the innovations are tried out or when we are experimenting new solutions in a classroom context, we should be allowing the resourcing to do so. And I think, Rob, you were mentioning also that, there are different kind of structures in the schools, like how teachers are allowed or how they are able to try out things in their context. And how do you kind of see the flexibility aspect in this one? As it's not your every curriculum where you could find a chapter about allowing space for playing games, but it's more kind of embed to the another kind of items in a curriculum where the playful learning can be used to learn some new skills or competencies.
So the first thing is to clarify, anything in education, you could potentially find an angle to gamify it. And even better, you could find the same structure, the same thing. Ash was talking a lot about the standards in the US. There's all these standards, and you will find 100 different teachers who are gamifying exactly the same subject, and they're doing it in a completely different way, right? So that's something that I think is actually a good thing. I've always liked to argue. I don't want to say clarify, because that means I have the truth, and I don't. But I'd like to argue, right, that gamification is definitely a design discipline in many ways. When you're using this, it's not about it's not a tech solution, first of all, right? But we already discussed it, but it's a design solution. It depends on who you're using it with, you know. And again, to keep with the examples in the US, but this applies absolutely everywhere. And I have an example for that as well. You know, it's not the same, the kid in a rural town in, I don't know, Michigan. I'm not, you know, too much into US geography or anything, but let's say rural town in Michigan than the kid who's learning this exact same thing in New York. Their backgrounds are different, their interests are different, their school is different, the tech they're using is different, their districts are different. So there's a bunch of things that even within those standards are very different. So the fact that their solution is different makes sense. You know, sometimes within that, you know, let's say that there's this district that has a lot more money, so the students have technology. Maybe in those cases, it makes sense to bring in something that is already connected to some technology. In other words, it doesn't, right? So that's the first thing. Anything can be gamified, in my opinion, as far as education. And, you know, no tech, somebody was asking as well in the chat about examples. There's many examples, but more than the examples themselves, I think it's more about gathering inspiration from games. And, you know, if you feel that looking at a video game is hard and to bring that into the sort of the physical world, well, there's a lot of physical world games as well, starting from sports, card games, board games. Go to the, you know, to the place where the kids play in that school and see what are they doing. Gather their interests, because you either have to be super passionate, and this has to do sometimes with theme, right? Sometimes you have a theme around your gamification and you talk about pirates or zombies or whatever it is that you want to talk about. So you either have to be super passionate and be able to transmit that passion to your students about that theme, right? Or you grab something that they're already interested in and bring it to the classroom and they're already excited about that thing. And then there's the other thing, right? Some people will say, well, 100% of the students are not the same. Of course not. But if you're tailoring even to just a portion of their interests, you're already doing a much better job than if you were trying to tailor for absolutely everybody, absolutely all the time. You're already trying to target at least some people. So when you target everybody, you're targeting nobody, right? I don't know if I'm missing anything from the question. At this point, I started sort of rambling into different directions, Lasse, so sorry about that.
No, I think that was actually a good and excellent segue also to something that I'm seeing in the chat. So Randall is thanking Brooke for making the distinction between gamification and game-based learning. And maybe we could actually be kind of like diving a little bit deeper into this one. So sometimes I also have the feeling that people might not always understand, you know, the differences between the different terms that might be used when we are discussing about games or play being used as a part of the learning. So would you mind elaborating a little bit more on this, Brooke?
Sure. So as I noted earlier, gamification is typically taking classically game-based mechanics and putting them into a non-game context. And I think that sounds simple, and I think that's why it became a sort of popular phrase over the past decade or so. But as Rob just mentioned, gamification is not just slapping points, badges, and leaderboards on things in hopes of motivating people, because kids all have different backgrounds. Kids are all excited about different things. Content does not always lend itself well to giving a point just because a behavior occurred or a skill was learned. It's supportive and it's helpful and it can be motivating, but like Rob just said, it requires a lot of design thinking that is sometimes overlooked. So I note that gamification is more of a broad term, and game-based learning tends to be using a game and playing a game to teach something, to transform a player in some way. We like to focus on transformation over and above education, not because it's more important, because it's more broad. You can change attitudes, you can change beliefs, you can change intentions. There's lots of things that you can do that will positively impact a student that isn't just the specific skill that you're aiming for. So we try to keep it more broad than that. But there are many different ways that these things can be implemented. There was a recent meta-analysis that showed more impact on motivation via gamification, but more impact on student learning outcomes from game-based learning. And I think we could all theorize as to why that is. Typically, game-based learning is used when there's a very specific game teaching a very specific thing. So it's not surprising that as long as the content of the game is standards aligned and good content, it's not surprising that a student might learn more from that, whereas be more motivated to engage in a lot of different types of content via gamification because it's a more flexible paradigm. So I think when I think about it, that's the way that I think about it. I know I've focused on transformational games that were explicitly designed for a transformational purpose. However, there are plenty of examples of entertainment games that have come back to education. We heard about one earlier in the talk. Minecraft was not designed to be an educational game, and it is often used as one because there's so many good things that you can learn. So I think they're both broad terms, but that's the general distinction that I use.
Yeah, thank you for kind of like diving deeper into this one. And there is also Viviana saying in the chat that there might be pain in implementing a gamification system in class from scratch, and then also kind of like referring that there are different kind of solutions that can help us to kind of like make that shift in the classroom context. So if we kind of like jump to the classroom as is having, so then how did you kind of like what kind Brooke was also mentioning like this kind of like attitudes and values, how they can be sifted through the gamification. What kind of changes did you see in your students, and how did they react when there were more play or more games involved as a part of the learning?
So the biggest change that I made initially was that I effectively made an achievement type system in my classroom, but different than some gamification implementations of something like that. This was not a badge system. This is not a ranking system. In fact, I think part of what makes those kinds of systems so effective in gaming is that they are not required. That's very important. The minute they're required, now it's just an extrinsic motivator. Here's the dangling carrot, check the box. Now it's not any different from a grade. And so when I made an achievement system that was entirely separated from any grades, it was something that kids could choose to engage with. And I had to be really, really intentional in how I did it. So I thought about how achievement structures work in games, and I thought about the different kinds of categories that those might fall into. There's ones that are really perfunctory, that you almost do by default. There's ones that are exclusionary, like you want to be the best or the most outstanding. There's ones that are exhaustive, like you're going after everything for that person who wants to collect everything. And so I thought about, okay, how do I do that within my content area? So at the time, this first started when I was a music teacher, and it was actually really useful because I could make some achievements that did align with goals of my classroom, but there was no weight in it. They weren't getting a grade. It wasn't giving them a sense of failure if they didn't do well at first. If anything, it actually gave them a safe way to fail, much like many games do. You know, if I'm trying to beat a boss 15 times and I keep dying every time, I always have a chance to try again. And the game isn't going to come in and say, well, you know, this is going to go on your permanent record if you get it wrong this time. So it was a great way to give them that space and practice. And what I found was that kids who maybe would have been really hesitant to try new things or learn new skills within the educational context of like an assessment or a test, they were then engaging with these achievements that were optional. They didn't graded. They didn't even have to do them, but they were then able to practice these skills without any judgment and without any concern. And then when it was time for me to actually assess those skills that I had been secretly aligning with my gamification, suddenly they were doing a whole lot better. And then they were more engaged, and then they were having more fun. So it's not always just the structure of like, how am I just going to do this from a logistical standpoint? It's also the psychology of, you know, how do I make sure that this is aligning with my students really need? And sometimes that's kind of tricking them into the learning a little bit.
Yeah, thanks for kind of like elaborating. And then there's actually something I want to ask more from you, and I would like to understand even more like the community aspect within the classroom, because like when you are playing the game together, you are kind of like exposed to the same things. What kind of collaboration or co-creation or, you know, working together did you see in the classroom, or change it, or did it change somehow the behavior of the students by trying to make those achievements?
Thank you for bringing that up again and reminding me of that. That was one of the things that I really, really loved observing. So I work in middle school, which is with students who are between 11 and 14, which is a very interesting time in kid development. And it's one of those times where a lot of kids don't necessarily want to work with each other. And so sometimes I feel like my whole job is kind of forcing them to like get along with other people, even if they don't really want to. And so I had several ways that I did this. I kind of grouped my classes into these like houses of students across classes. So they were effectively collaborating asynchronously, even if they didn't necessarily know it, or even if they didn't necessarily want to. So if a kid in my first period class got an achievement that day, well, that is like actually benefiting a kid 3 years older than them that is in a whole different class. And then they were kind of asynchronously seeing like, oh, this person did this, oh, this person did that. And that really brought in some camaraderie. I also made sure that when I organized my students, I gave them sort of like mascots that were like important to our context or our content. It was a great way to bring in people I thought were important and make sure I was also bringing in, you know, some good inclusive representation. So it was great ways to kind of align all of that together. And I also tried to make sure that some of the achievements that I was doing gave students the opportunity to maybe show off some of their personality or be a little bit, you know, unique in some way if they wanted to. And it was a great way for them to just sort of then casually share with each other. I have a visual somewhere, but one of my achievements one year was to make a superhero identity of a composer from classical history based on facts about them. And I had this one student who made this like mascot of Beethoven, and I still have a drawing of it. It was incredible. And sure enough, you know, immediately kids are like, what is that? Who is that? Why is that important? So just the way that it would ignite not only a student's own interest, but then other students' potential interests, I found really great and a lot more impactful than if I had tried to do that myself.
Fantastic. Thank you for kind of like letting us know a few like very concrete and practical examples. And now, dear attendees of this webinar, now it's now or never moment, because you have still a few seconds left to ask a question in a chat or in a Q&A box. And I think Jamie has been picking up something for us. So Jamie, the stage is yours.
All right, so I have a few questions. One is, does gamification lead to competition among students? And how do we make that competition healthy and compelling to make students desire to be the best versions of themselves and not necessarily breed negative competitive energies? This question can be for anyone.
I'd love to hop in there, and Rob will hop in up right after me. Sorry about that. So Ash was just talking about using cooperation as a way to allow students to be always striving to achieve something, but not hoping that somebody else fails so that they can be better. We found great success with doing something like this when we created a gamification system that was encouraging healthy eating in schools. Rather than each student competing with themselves, they were competing with alongside of their whole school. They had a school-wide consumption goal. If they met it, they got to move on to the next level of the game, the next narrative story, you know, get closer to catching the bad guy. And it was extraordinarily impactful. Students were, you know, kind of elbowing each other at the table saying, hey, are you sure you don't want to eat that cucumber? Like, you can do it, it's cool. So, you know, we love to see that kind of camaraderie. So I would say that that is certainly one way, setting up your game structure, your contingencies to reward the behavior of everyone, not just an individual.
Perfect. And let's hand it over to Rob.
So very quickly, I fully agree with Brooke. It's about how you set it up. One thing that happens to me very often in workshops, classes, etc., is that the first thing that we tend to think when we think about games and gamification, I'm not entirely sure why. Maybe somebody here has the answer, is competition and leaderboards, right? That is the first thing that comes to mind. Again, I'm not entirely sure why that is, because I know of many games that are not competitive at all. And I know of a lot of people who actually don't like competition. They're just not motivated by it. So being afraid that that's going to turn them into competitive, I mean, it's fine. I mean, again, I would set up the game in a non-competitive environment, and that's it. Like, there's mechanics to go in the exactly opposite way. When students are very competitive, and I do have business school students who are very competitive, what I try to do is I break that dynamic. So we put them in teams to cooperate in the team and compete with other teams. So they kind of get together in temporary teams so they don't just, build tribes or anything. And then the other thing is we trick them into thinking that they're competing. Right. So they think that they're in a team competing against other ones. There's this specific one that we use, and they're actually not competing. And had they all collaborated together, they would have gotten the best results for everyone. Right. And just for a second, I wanted to piggyback to a comment made, I think it was by Ash, on grade earning gamification. Like, my strong recommendation is never associate a grade to something that is being gamified. I have personal experience. I mean, after giving this advice to so many people, I have personal experience screwing up my own advice and, getting the worst results I could get. It was experience. I'm not mad or anything about it, but just really try to avoid it, because when you introduce gamification and think about it, you're not trying to grade them better. I think grading is fine, if anything, right? You're not trying to change that. You're trying to help them learn better. So associate the learning to the gamification, to game-based learning, game-based solutions, instead of trying to grade them better. So that I just wanted to drop that in.
Thanks, Rob. And then let's have one more quick one. And now, Jamie, is there something else that we could be asking from our dear panelists?
Yeah, we have a question about parents. How have you seen parents reacting to gamification of education? Maybe this one's for you, Ash.
Yeah, I straddle this odd world of being both an educator really into this, and then I somehow also became a parenting influencer about technology. So somehow I'm in both these worlds, and it's interesting. I think I had very naively thought that a lot of the hesitance was from within education, and then I realized that actually there's just a lot of not knowing a lot about this in general from a lot of communities. So I wouldn't say that I see a lot of direct pushback, but I do think that I get genuine questions of, like, what is it they're doing? And not any different really than just wanting to know what their student is doing in the classroom in general. Parents kind of send their kids off to school and then don't always know what's going on, because we'll ask kids, what do you do all day? And kids will say nothing. I don't know. I don't remember. So I think it's more just genuine, like, curiosity. And so what I would advise teachers, if you're having, parents or caregivers ask you for that, I would not assume that they are being cynical. I would assume that they genuinely want to know. And that's a great opportunity to really talk about how it's expanding or augmenting learning in a really meaningful way. There is kind of a pushback sometimes against technology, as if all technology is somehow negative in some way, but the reality is we're in a technologically driven world, and that's not going to go away. That reality is not going to go away. And so if we really look at it as a way of harnessing the value of it and finding ways to make that increase student learning, I think that's a really great thing, and could be a great way to kind of get parents to understand that, and also potentially help them in how they frame technology and technology use in home environments.
Thank you, Ash. And how does that resonate with you, Brooke?
I would agree that I think it's a lot of either misinformation or just lack of understanding, basically, of how could learning possibly be fun. When I was in school, learning wasn't fun. What are you doing? So I think having open dialogue about these things and being able to point back to, if you're, for example, using a specific game for learning, point back to what standards it's teaching and how. And it's a really nice way to have a lot of trust and communication between students, teachers, parents, teachers, all around.
Very good. All right. Anything, Rob, that you would like to add at this point to the discussion?
I don't want to take more time out of that. I know you guys are tight on a budget of time, so if you have anything else, I can jump in. But I think Ash and Brooke have done a fantastic job.
All right. So thank you for the answers, and I have really enjoyed this conversation with you, and I kind of feel like if I would need to summarize this a little bit, I would say that it's very important that when we are discussing about gamification, we should be understanding the different concepts, how games and play can be part of the learning experience. And then we should also kind of like understand that it can be influencing the learning community on different levels. And we often say at HundrED that the purpose of education for us is help every child flourish in life, no matter what happens. And as was beautifully kind of like describing how important it is that we build resilience within ourselves, that when we face failures or some of our experiments doesn't work as we hoped for, that we can, find that as a learning opportunity and move on. And games can be a very good way for us to do so. And then I really also enjoyed, Rob, how you were kind of like elaborating like how you can be seeing these things happening on different levels. And what I would be kind of like hoping us to do next is that I would like you to ask like maybe if you have like any other questions that you would like to discuss or share with us, please ask those, and we try to answer those when we are doing our spotlight related items and communications later. But now I would like to invite Deb to the stage, who have been collaborating with us with us on this topic. And to keep things always moving and exciting, it seems like that the very beautiful cream wall behind of my back decided to start watering itself. So if you are wondering what that odd sound is, it is that one. Deb, could I ask you to join me on the stage?
Sure. Hi there. How's it going? And hi to everybody as well. It's been such an interesting discussion. I feel like I've learned a lot. It's been super interesting.
And you were mentioning in the beginning of this webinar before that we open it up for the participants, that you really kind of like wanted to discuss with every panelist that we were having for today's session. So how did you find that conversation, and any kind of like remarks you would like to point out from the discussion?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think there were lots of points. I think definitely that distinction between, kind of game-based learning versus gamification, and then the kind of interest in the space of gamification, but the kind of slow adoption in the classroom. I know that, when you and I were at South by Southwest earlier this year, we had a meetup actually just around this topic of gamification, and so many people turned up, kind of the same way that it is here, but there was so much interest, but a lot of teachers said that they themselves weren't really equipped to try to bring this to the classroom. So I also think, for us in the gaming space, I'm interested to see how maybe we can also help, right? Or help equip teachers so that they feel more confident in bringing this to students. So yeah, I think those were a few of the things. And then, of course, what Namya was saying in the beginning as well, that just so many different like benefits and skill sets actually come from gamification, that you can use for the rest of your life, whether it's that creativity or collaboration, leadership skills, teamwork. So yeah, those are some of the main things that kind of resonated.
Yeah, and as a Supercell is a gaming company, and you do games, so of course you love everything that is related to gamification and such things. But then why is Supercell so interested in education? Like where do you kind of like see kind of like some like why do you want to be involved? 100 Spotlight on Gamified Curricula is the question I am trying to ask, I guess.
Yeah, I think for a few different reasons. I think a lot of people probably don't know this because they don't really talk about it, but we've been engaged in the education space for a long time. So whether it's been partnering with 100 or one of our main projects that we support is called Speed Schools. We have a couple of projects, one in Uganda, one in Ethiopia, and it's an accelerated learning program. And I was actually just there a few weeks ago to kind of see it in action in person and meet the teachers, the ministries, the students, and what they've been able to do is combine 3 years of learning into 10 months by using like a play-based learning curriculum. And when you see that kind of like a level of learning, you're like, why aren't we doing this everywhere? So they actually, this is for students who have come out of the regular school system, usually due to economic reasons, and then they re-enter the regular school system. So they use this to catch up, and then they do better than the students in the regular school system, but not just, with knowledge, but also with things like public speaking, confidence, leadership. So, that's one of the things we've been sort of invested in. And then we also have a coding school here in Helsinki called Hive. And I saw Giovanni from Hive in the chat, actually. And that, again, is based on a gamified curriculum. There are no teachers per se. There's a lot of self-directed learning. The whole system is gamified that people move through. And it's sort of to try to create more access to industry. So I guess there's a few different reasons. Like one is we've been kind of involved in this space a long time, but for us as well, we're seeing that traditional means of education, even to get into our industry, is kind of missing the mark a lot of the time. School is really expensive, takes a long time. And when people get into the working world, oftentimes they're not equipped with the skills they actually need, either because the curriculum is outdated because it's taken so long, or because they're not learning things like, working in a team, cooperation, failing, trying again, all of these different things that actually are useful in the working world. So
yeah, and many of these things were discussed in our discussion during the past hour, and I something that I really would like to pick up what you were saying was the self-directed learning. And I think like that's the beauty of great games, that you are so excited about the game world and the ways how you can engage with the game, that you want to, create those skills that how you can master the game. And then when we can bring that into actual classroom and we can support the students' learning, we can make fantastic things happen. And we really would like to identify these kind of solutions for our Spotlight on the Gamified Curricula. And if you, as an attendee, are having a solution or intervention in this space, you still have time until mid-June to submit your innovation to the Spotlight, and you will find more information on that from the chat and from the 100 website. So thank you, Deb, for joining us today for this session as well. And now I would like to hand this back to Jamie, who will be summarizing the webinar and letting you know what is going to happen next.
All right, thank you, Lasse. Thanks, Deb. So this brings us to the end of the roundtable. I'd like to thank everyone in attendance today for participating and contributing with your questions. Thank you to Deborah for being with us and representing Supercell. Thanks to Namya for your amazing talk, as well as our panelists, Rob, Brooke, and Ash, for your insightful contributions to the discussion. We look forward to staying in touch with you and continue to learn from the amazing work that you are doing. So what's next is that we'll be publishing the recording of this webinar on our Spotlight page, which is linked to the chat. So if you missed any parts, you can come back and watch it again or share the recording with your friends. Another thing is, please remember that if you are working on an innovation that is gamifying curricula, then make sure to submit your innovation to our Spotlight on Gamified Curricula by June 15th. You can also find the link to submit that in the chat. And yeah, that wraps it all up. So thank you everyone for attending.